Hi guys, and welcome to your second webinar, Macronutrients. I touched on macronutrients a little bit in the first webinar, energy balance, and we're going to be going into much more detail now. So let's get into it. So as per the first webinar and all the webinars really, we're going to be going over a quick introduction of what we want you to, or what I specifically want you to learn through this. So firstly, the three macronutrients. Secondly, their importance within our body. And then lastly, where we can find them and how much we should be having. So macronutrients, what are they? So firstly, your proteins. So you should know at this point in the program a little bit about protein. There's a whole document donated to protein that your coach can send you if they haven't already. So if you do want a little bit more reading, please just ask your coach and they will send that across to you. But as you can see, here's a few things, few examples of foods that have good sources of protein. Now understand that protein is not only found in animal products. You can get protein and good levels of protein in other food sources as well. But also please note, and this is something I'll go into in more detail in another webinar, when we're talking about complete and incomplete proteins, there's much more, there's much less option from a vegetarian and vegan perspective. So just bear that in mind. Dietary fats, so here's another example of some foods that will have good levels of dietary fat, and we'll go into that in more detail shortly. And last but not least, carbohydrates, okay, so bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, etc. Okay, so they are your three macronutrients. You may have heard people talking about macros in the past, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's what it is. Now, I talked about in webinar one, the almost like forgotten macronutrient, the forgotten element of the overall food and drink equation, which is alcohol. Alcohol has its own webinar donated to it because it's an important subject. So we won't be talking about alcohol today. We'll be talking about the three macronutrients that are in front of you. So benefits of protein, just in case you're not sure. So protein very much has lots of benefits, but is the building blocks for all the bodily structures, bone, muscle, skin, hair, and nails. Okay, so really important macronutrient to consume, often one that gets a little bit neglected by people. Repairs and rebuilds muscle tissue, which is really, really important because, even if you're not going to the gym, you're not doing sports and things, you want to preserve the muscle that you've got, and you are using your muscle. Even if you just go for a walk, you are using muscles. And you want to preserve that muscle. And for any of our older clients that are watching, you do not want to speed up, you want to slow down sarcopenia. Now, sarcopenia, if you're not sure what that means, is essentially the process that most people will go through as they get older, which is the degeneration of muscle. So if you have, you may have seen your parents or your grandparents or whoever, and they're very old and they're quite frail. Almost looks like the wind could blow them over. They might have had falls, and they're just very frail. And often that is sarcopenia. That's the degeneration of muscle for lots of different reasons. But often, as you grow older, you don't consume as many calories as you once did, and you definitely don't have the amount of protein that you probably should. So just bear that in mind because that's an important point. And if you've got parents, grandparents that you're very close with, and you monitor their diet, and you think, wait a minute, they're having a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of fats, but not a lot of protein, you might want to have a chat with them. I don't think at any age you should stop being health seeking and being aware of these things. But often, parents don't listen to their children. My mother's done this program because she wanted my help, which is great, as is my brother and my sister actually. However, I never coached them because they just wouldn't listen to me, even though I'm the head coach. Moving on. Protein in the blood transports oxygen, which is obviously important, makes up enzymes and antibodies. I can go into more detail on that, or your coach can go into more detail on that if you so want. I don't think that's important and an overly important subject to get caught up in with most people. And definitely makes us feel full and satisfied, which is a really important point. And I'm hoping at this point in the program you're going, do you know what? Like normally when I'm on a diet, I've binged or I've wanted to have this or that or whatever. And one of the reasons you haven't is because of protein making you feel full, which is always a good thing. So benefits of fat, moving on. So it's a source of stored energy. We all have dietary fat, apologies. We all have fat within our body composition. There was one known man in history, and the name escapes me, that died with no fat on his body whatsoever. And Google it, because with all due respect to him, he was an incredible person in a lot of ways. He died young, but he didn't look like what I would say would be a normal human body and skeleton shape, etc. His glutes were quite unbelievable. You wouldn't have looked at his bum and thought that was a bum. So your glutes are the muscles in your bum. Otherwise, apart from that one exception, everyone has fat on them. It's just whether you've got more than you want, etc., etc. But it is a stored energy source. Apologies, going back one. Supports healthy brain function, which is really important. Vitamin absorption, which is very, very important. So, there are certain vitamins that need dietary fat to be absorbed within the body. Not all of them. And we go into more detail in that in the vitamins webinar and the micronutrients webinar. But yes, very important. Don't neglect your dietary fat. The easy thing to do with dietary fat is go, oh, I have fat, I don't want it anymore, so I won't have any dietary fat. And there's sense to that. I can understand someone thinking that way, but remember, you put on fat by having too many calories, not by having dietary fat. You could have a high amount of dietary fat in your diet in your normal day and be in a calorie deficit, and you wouldn't store any of it because your body would need to use it as a source of energy. Supports hormone production, and ladies, trust me, I've worked with a lot of clients over the years, and I've worked with females that have stopped their menstrual cycle because they are too low. They have too low amounts of body fat on their body, and their dietary fat is too low as well. It's not where you want to be. It's not healthy. It's a big warning sign. And unfortunately, and I know a little bit about this because my wife competed years ago in a professional fitness bikini modeling contest. Most women that get on stage and do those things, unfortunately, they don't have a menstrual cycle because they've dieted down to such an extreme length that it stopped. And if that's not a warning sign, I'm not quite sure what is. Provides insulin, which I appreciate. Some people might say, yeah, I've probably got enough of that, but it does. And it does make food taste good and fantastic often. Although ironically, we might need to change that picture because there's more carb-based foods that I would say rather than fat. But anyway, but it does make food taste very good. And years ago, when they realised people were starting to put on weight, they started this low-fat thing, and it's still there today. You'll see low-fat yogurts and all these different products that are available. And actually, if you look at the low-fat option versus the normal option, often the normal option has the same, sometimes even less calories in than low-fat, because they took the fat out, realised it tastes like crap, so put in a load of sugar. So from a calorie perspective, it didn't really make much of a difference. And bear that in mind, because like I say, if you're going for a low-fat option, you're taking away some of the benefits that we're talking about here. Benefits of carbs. So carbs, whether someone tells you differently or not, send them my way, but it is the body's main source of energy. There are people that love to shout about different diets and different approaches, and they can do what they want, but they need to be factual. And the facts are that carbs are the body's preferred and main source of energy. Supporting digestion in and around fibre. And we have a whole webinar based and donated to fibre. So we will be talking about fibre at a later date in a little bit more detail. We have a whole document that we can send to your fibre as well. So if you'd like to get some reading in before that webinar, just message your coach and say, can I please have the fibre document, please? And they will happily send it across. Also supports use of brain, central nervous system, and red blood cells, which is obviously really important. Your brain needs a constant and frequent, I'm not sure that makes sense, constant and frequent? Constant would be the word I should use. A constant stream of glucose to the brain to essentially do its job. And glucose is essentially, when you consume carbs, it gets broken down in the body down into glucose. If you have a low amount of carbs and your body needs carbs, it will actually take protein and turn it into glucose, which is very impressive. I'm sure you agree. And does taste incredible, much like fat. But interestingly, isn't it, when you refine something down to its most refined state, you wouldn't pick up a spoonful of sugar and eat it. That would be too sweet. Just like salt would be too salty, and fat, you wouldn't just drink oil. I'm sure the thought of that would make you, sort of raise an eyebrow at least. So there are cutoff points, and I talk about that in different webinars. And the perfect example I can give there is around salt. So let's not confuse matters. Salt is not a macronutrient. I'm just using it as an example here. If you have fish and chips, if you get the salt right, it tastes great. If there's too much salt on it, you're like, oh, that's too salty. It's too much. So yes, carbohydrates taste fantastic, but there is a certain limit if you want. If you wouldn't just take sugar, like I say, and eat it. Maybe unless you're a child. Moving on, types of fats. So just wanted to quickly touch on this. Not going to go into it in loads of detail because it will take too long, and I'm also always happy to talk to people about different types of fats on a one-to-one basis, as is your coach. But I wanted to highlight the types of fats because often people say, oh, there's good and bad fat. And to be honest, it's not that black and white, with the exception of one, and that's trans fats. Trans fats, essentially, I very, very rarely use this word, and if you're coached by me and you know me, you'll know how infrequently I use it. Trans fats are essentially bad for you. They are a man-made fat. They are fantastic for preserving shelf life, which for some countries, that can be great. But actually, for the human body, the effects it has, really does. You really do want to avoid it where you can. It's not totally avoidable because we're not robots, we're humans. And you're going to have cake, you're going to have biscuits sometimes, etc. And it's okay, don't panic. But if you're having a lot of these things, you probably want to address your food choices and be aware of some of the associated risks to having high trans fats in your diet. But the rest of the fats, saturated, poly, mono, unsaturated, they all hold their place. Don't let anyone tell you differently. Unfortunately, saturated fat and trans fat often get grouped together in studies, and it's really unfair because it's like, they are two very, very different types of fat. And saturated fat, I'm telling you now, has its place. But much like most things, a common sense approach can be implemented, and too much of most things is not a good thing. My mum told me that when I was younger, and it was probably true. We've almost, I can't think of many things, to be honest, that. Well, I'm trying to think of an example now, and I can't. But if you're constantly eating fruit all day long, you're probably going to give yourself a bit of an upset stomach. Even though fruit is very, very nutrient dense and holds lots of positive values. But like I say, you don't want to go mad on anything necessarily. So the other fats definitely hold their place, but just try to reduce your trans fat intake because, like I say, all the studies show that really does have adverse effects to your health long term. Types of carbs. So just quickly wanted to touch on this because you will hear about good and bad carbs. Again, try not to use those words. It's not good and bad. It's not that black and white. Very, very rarely is it. You have these simple carbs, which are essentially refined down carbohydrates, so sweets, cake, sugar, fizzy pop, etc. Then you've got the complex carbs, which are the opposite. So they're imagine a necklace, like a Marge Simpson necklace with the pearls. Simple carbs is just one pearl, so you consume it and it doesn't take very long to break down because it's already broken down. Whereas the complex carb is like a pearl necklace, and then there's lots of beads on it, so it takes longer to break down. And your mother or your grandparent or whoever might have said to you in the past, have porridge, it's a slow releaser. That's kind of what they mean by it. And last but not least, fibre, which, like I say, we will go into more detail on in a different webinar. I should maybe call these lectures. Hope they're not lectures. Hope you don't feel like I'm lecturing you. So what we need, so from a protein perspective, so really in most circumstances, 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilo you weigh. That is a typo, that's my error, hands up, apologies. I'm supposed to say kilo, which is why the example is based on kilos. So if you're an 80 kilo person, it would be 96 to 120 grams of protein. Now, just bear in mind, there's a couple of clinical reasons as to why you wouldn't go to those ranges. So if you're a perfectly healthy individual with no clinical issues, then that amount of protein is perfectly fine. A higher amount is also fine. There's no top end limit really from a health perspective, a direct health perspective to protein. But there are some clinical things in and around kidneys that you need to just be aware of. So if you have kidney issues, just let your coach know. You also might be looking at this going, wait a minute, 1.2 to 1.5, mine's lower than that. Why is it lower than that? And sometimes we will lower your protein target because the appropriate level just is not deliverable. And if you can't deliver something, often most humans will react to that negatively and want to quit. And I'd prefer you have a slightly lower protein target for a short period of time and we can build on that and you stick to it and you adhere and you stay consistent, rather than us giving you a target that's totally unrealistic and you just feel like you're failing. So just bear that in mind. From a fat point of view, 2 points I just want to make here. So firstly, I've put 25% on the screen and that's what I tell people, but the science does show that 20% is okay. I just say to people, look, go to 25% because if it's 25%, then you know, if you fall slightly below that, then you're still just above the minimum amount. So it's the percentage of calories that you consume. So if you had, for example, on the screen, 2,000 calories, 25% of 2,000 calories is 500 calories, so 55.5 grams of fat. Just bear in mind, like, it's not a number that you have to drive towards. And if you have 26%, nothing's going to happen. Like, don't worry. It's just the minimum would be 25% or 20 if you're going by the exact science. But I don't like to flirt that close with the lower end, which is why I suggest 25. But you could go much higher than that and it's not going to cause you any issues at all. Okay, so just bear that in mind. From a carbohydrates perspective, make up the remaining calories. So if you got 2,000 calories, for example, 500 calories goes towards fat, and your protein, let's say, for example, another 500 goes to that. The other 1,000 can go to carbohydrates, and it's perfectly fine. Make it fit your lifestyle and your goals. So if you're into sports more and the gym and being more active, then you're probably going to want some more carbs, particularly on training days. If you're not that type of person and you enjoy dietary fat a bit more, then go with that. It's perfectly fine. But understand, none of these macronutrients are bad for you. They all hold their place. I've touched on the benefits of all of them already. You need to make sure you're having all of them and not demonizing or unnecessarily restricting any of them. So, in summary, know your macronutrients. So, fat is equal to 9 calories per gram, carbs is equal to 4 calories per gram, as is protein, okay? Touched on that in webinar 1, touched on it again now. You should know that now, okay? So, 944, okay? Fat is 2.25 times more calorie dense than carbs and protein, but holds its place, okay? Don't neglect it. Understand the role of each macronutrient and how that can benefit you, which I've obviously touched on in great length. Enjoy your macros in balance. I touched on that just a second ago. There is no need to unnecessarily restrict any one of those macronutrients. They all hold their place and their benefits. And also, let's not forget, which is why we put it on the screen, although that is alcohol, which is a whole different webinar. The point in the picture is that life is also to be enjoyed. And if you're constantly obsessively thinking about macro splits and calories, and I can't do this, I can't do that, guys, I'm here to tell you that's a disordered way of thinking. You don't want to go down that route, okay? Life is to be enjoyed. It's going to be times where you don't hit your protein target, and guess what? It's okay. No one's going to judge you. You're not loved any less by your loved ones. Nothing significant is going to change. Just try to strive towards them when you can and be mindful of the choices that you're making. All choices or actions have consequences. If you're constantly consuming more calories than you require, and out of those calories a high number of trans fat, unfortunately, guys, don't be surprised if later on in life you're going to have health issues because the associations and the risks are there. Just like if someone's been particularly active and looked after themselves all their life and they don't tend to suffer with much from a health perspective, it's not a coincidence either. The choices that have led them to that point have been in their favour and reduced their risk. But yeah, enjoy it. Life's to be enjoyed as well. Relax. That's the take-home point. And as always, asking questions on the Facebook live Q&As that I do. I love to answer questions from you guys. I love to teach. Hopefully you're picking that up already. There's loads more webinars to come. Really looking forward to taking you through them all, along with some other coaches as well. It won't always be me. And yeah, I'll speak to you all very soon.